What's up, everybody? I got quite a few of you in the comments section asking for more history videos and some new peeps in talking about Tartaria and Mudflood. So I'm going to do a video on both. And I'm going to show you what I found versus what the internet found. Now we even got AI doing hour and 45 minutes of just straight babble on the subject, getting 265,000 views, which they'll never let my channel do. They've been doing better lately, but they'll never let it go like some of these other channels. So the whole reason I started making videos was because of the Mudflood subject. If you're new around here, look down in the comments because a good 5,000 to 10,000 people remember this first series of videos I did, and that's my core audience because I got shadow banned for 5 years afterwards. I'll tell you more about that later, but there was literally a handful, less than 5 of us. Then it blew up and all kinds of people were making videos on it, and the algo really promoted Tartaria. So I was there at the very beginning of the Mudflood Tartaria subject. I had access to the same internet that everybody else did, the same information, and somehow what I found was quite different than what everybody else found. So first, I'm going to show you guys what I learned over the course of the next few years, and then we'll talk about Tartaria and how that came to be. So I know today pretty much everybody knows about the past disaster cycles, but when we started this, nobody had a clue. But for me, it made the gaps in history make sense. So here's the basic rundown of what I found on this is, every 5,000 to 10,000 years, who knows? I don't try to put exact dates on cycles because I don't think it's an internal mechanism. I think the really big world age-ending events come from outside sources, including the sun. But the last one of these was Noah's flood. It's remembered all around the world. The Aztec, Greek, and Egyptians all say the world before that ended by fire. And these are the really big ones where you only have a handful of people that make it through. Noah, Deucalion, Utnapishtim. Then you have the civilization ending events, the Bronze Age collapse, 536 AD, 1300s event, which we'll get into. And I'd ballpark that 400 to 800 years. And then the sun cycles every 200 to 400 years. You had the Little Ice Age in the 1600s, the Maunder Minimum, and then the Dalton Minimum, 1812 era, which we'll get into. And these caused disturbances, regional famine, changes in agriculture and what you can plant in regions, but generally low on the mortality rate unless a revolution breaks out like in France. An Icelandic volcano killed the crops in France, so food was scarce, expensive, and people were starving. Then that's when you hear about Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake," which I think was a rumor that got started by those activist agitators I talk about a lot. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and started the French Revolution. So yeah, an Icelandic volcano ushered in the French Revolution and the Dalton Minimum. So that's the Earth cycle as I see it. Let's talk about civilization ending events. There's not much information about the Bronze Age collapse. There's all kinds of archaeological evidence showing it. But this was around the time of the Trojan War. I have found stories around 200 to 300 BC. This is their dating. One of the Greek writers tells of a town being swallowed and they sent people to help, but there was nobody left to help. But that sticks around the 800-year timeline, and it's the separation between Greek and Roman times, basically. But let's get up to the 536 AD event where we do have some information. Now, some say this was caused by a volcano. Some say it was due to a comet or meteorite impact. So scientists today argue about the cause, but they all know it happened and apparently never asked the historians what people said about it. For 18 months, they described the sun as just being a blue haze, barely any light getting through. There was just this dry fog, no wind, and it never rained. So that's not just going to cause crop failures, it's going to cause all plant life to not grow, affecting the entire food chain. This was at the time of Emperor Justinian, and he financed the Ravenna Cathedral, and in there they have all of these Easter eggs about the cataclysm. Jesus is sitting on a blue sun, it looks like. There's no land masses on the painting, and that's the way they described the sun for 18 months. They show the ground all broken up into these chasms, which I'll have more on in a minute, and little specks of fire everywhere like it's raining fire. Here they show a shockwave in the sky with all red sky behind it, fiery. When you have a significant explosion, watch up at the top here. See that shockwave forming? Well, that's what they're showing here, only it's going down, so this came from above. And Cassiodeius talked about this thing getting bigger and bigger by the day coming this way, and they were all full of dread. So some people probably saw a big airburst, but different people are going to experience different things in different places, you know? Romano Melodos wrote, "One blow after another, like a massive lightning streaked cloud, fire billowed into the entire sky, consuming everything, crashing, creating panic. He shakes the earth and makes the ground gnash. We wailed during the period of earthquakes. The flames did not yield to fierce headwinds. Men's hands were useless in trying to control the flames. The raindrops in the clouds never fall on earth. Flames, eager to engulf the city, were fed by roof timbers and whipped into a firestorm by ferocious winds." So that's how people experience this in Constantinople. And even on the other side of the world, you have the Maya hiatus. That's the first time I've heard that term used for it, but this affected everybody around the world. Scientists study each little location by itself, and here they say it was likely a volcano in Mexico. And since they're compartmentalized, I guess they never hear about. The historians have stories of this, but they know there was severe drought at this time. And see down at the bottom where they say sea level changes? Well, I've got another account, same time period, over in South Asia, saying that Java and Sumatra used to be connected and that they had local volcanoes and earthquakes going on. So this was popping everywhere, and it led to or caused the Justinian plague. And accounts vary between 100 and 200 million people that didn't make it to see the next year, or at least half the population. So we're talking about a major historical event that makes you wonder, why did I never hear this in school? Why does no one know about this? And why do they ignore all the other calamities going on and the changes and say everything was just Yersinia pestis? Then the crazy thing is, this didn't just happen once, it happened twice with the Dark Ages in the middle. And there's two ways I can look at this. That's what caused the Dark Ages, or the Dark Ages didn't actually happen. That's a big, long subject we're not going to get into. I'm also not going to get into the dating, but the 1300s is basically where the dating problems start. They call this the Great Famine of 1314. It was nonstop, incessant rain for months. If you guys remember Hurricane Helene, that was 2 to 3 days of nonstop rain, and in the 1300s, we're talking 2 to 3 months. There were places in England that there was no topsoil left to plant when it dried out. This also led to the Little Ice Age. But they say this was in 1314 in Western Europe. Now, we'll come back across that as we go here. Then in 1333 China, you had a parching drought accompanied by famine. That was followed by such violent torrents of rain that, according to tradition, 400,000 were washed away. Finally, the mountain Chinshu fell in, and vast clefts were formed in the earth. That's mountain number 1 that's fallen in. Then the next year in Canton, you had the same thing, drought, then flood. Contagion arose, which carried off about 5 million. A few months afterwards, an earthquake followed, subsequent to the falling in of the mountains of Qimingchen, and the lake was formed more than 100 leagues circumference. So that's mountains 2 through 5 that fell in, I guess. And a league is 3.4 miles, so that's a 340-mile lake that formed. I'm sure a mountain fell in and blocked a river, and people always live along rivers, so they're just watching the water level come up day by day by day. So all their cities and villages mud flooded. Then great floods occurred in the vicinity of the Rhine, Germany, and in France, which could not be attributed to rain alone. For everywhere, even on tops of mountains, springs were seen to burst forth, and dry tracks were laid underwater in an inexplicable manner. Pretty much everywhere has water aquifers underneath of us, and in a major seismic event, things shift and that water will come up out of the ground. Today they'll say they're just exaggerating or they were just crazy old men. But if they didn't experience this, then they wouldn't know about it, and it does happen. Keep your eye on this tree or pole right here. Yoink. That just moved like 12, 15 feet in a second. You can just imagine what that would do to a stacked stone building. And I think this is minor compared to what they were going through back in the day. In the following year, the mountain Hongchang fell in, what's that, mountain number 6, and caused a destructive deluge. And in Pyeongchang, after 3 months' rain, there followed unheard of inundations, which destroyed 7 cities. So once again, we have nonstop rain for several months. Then you have reports coming out of Egypt and Syria for quakes. Then this is up in Europe. In thousands of places, chasms were formed from whence arose noxious vapors. It was reported that a fiery meteor, which descended on the earth far in the east, had destroyed everything within a circumference of more than 100 leagues, infecting the air far and wide. We actually have a modern example of these chasms being formed. This was the big one over in Turkey a couple of years ago, and that used to be one solid olive grove. And the people that live around there say it was like a missile barrage, just loud booms and popping. Then probably because of the quartz in there, there were electrical discharges going off like volcanic lightning. So here we have one chasm that formed. There were thousands back in that event. And now check this out. They say that a fiery meteor destroyed everything within 100 leagues. Once again, we're about 340 miles. So something with a circumference of 340 miles is diameter times 3.14, which is a 100-mile diameter. This depression that looks different than all the surrounding landscape has a diameter of about 100 miles. And to the people in Europe who wrote the account of the fiery meteor, this is far in the east to them. And check this out. The name of the place is If You Go There, You Won't Come Back, because of a number of stories of people or groups of people returning years or even decades after going to the island, thinking they had been gone only 2 or 3 days. So we got some interdimensional Manhattan Project going on here or something. But I don't know if that's an actual impact site, but that is how big of an area they're talking about. It could have been an airburst instead of an impact, and they note that it was a fiery meteor raining down fire like what's described here. Then about 5 years into my research on this, I stumbled across this, and this is a book that has nothing to do with anything we're talking about. This is an Iroquois in the 1800s writing about the history of his people. Then in the middle of it, he says, right here, 150 years before Columbus discovered America, he talks about what was going on at the time, and then down here it says, about this time, an earthquake was felt throughout the kingdom. It's supposed a large comet fell into some of the lakes, that's the Great Lakes, northeast region of America, and other signs were seen in the heavens. Columbus came in 1492, so 150 years before that was 1342, the exact same time that they're saying all this was going off over in Europe. And this just happens to line up with the Carolina Bays impact event, a huge airburst that happened somewhere over the Great Lakes, only they say this was millions and millions of years ago, and it shot huge chunks all up and down the East Coast, forming these small lakes. So this isn't a book on meteorites or anything like that, comets. It starts out with the creation story of the Iroquois, and it confirms the meteors, earthquakes, and cosmic phenomenon. This was also the same time that all these Native American cultures started disappearing. The Mississippian culture, which was millions and millions of people, and geologists can see the flooding that occurred at this time and then the drought. We know how to identify floodplains and even drought because of the pollen samples that are contained in that layer. So I've confirmed through multiple disciplines that this was, in fact, a worldwide event around 700 years ago, and somehow academia doesn't realize this. Or probably more accurately, they won't accept it. So a little bit more about this, and then we're going to talk some Tartar. In 1348, an unexampled earthquake shook Greece, Italy, and the neighboring countries. Naples, Rome, Pisa, Bologna, Padua, Venice, and many other cities suffered considerably. Whole villages were swallowed up. Castles, houses, and churches were overthrown, and hundreds of people were interred beneath their ruins. In Corinthia, 30 villages, together with all the churches, were demolished. More than 1,000 were drawn out of the rubbish. The city of Valak was so completely destroyed that very few of its inhabitants were saved. And when the earth ceased to tremble, it was found that mountains had been moved from their positions and that many hamlets were left in ruin. Great and extraordinary meteors appeared in many places and were regarded with superstitious horror. A pillar of fire, which on the 20th of December 1348 remained for an hour at sunrise over the Pope's palace in Avignon. And trust me, I can go on and on about this, but I wanted to give you guys the picture of it. So now back to the beginning of this. It took me years to piece together all of that information. And I've put together concrete historical and scientific info on this to where I wouldn't be embarrassed in the least to walk in front of an auditorium full of professors and say, look, I think there was a worldwide event in the 1300s that probably decimated world populations, and you guys have just compartmentalized it and you only focus on the plague part of it. Which, by the way, this is all of that I just read is what happened just before the Black Death. And several accounts say that it was those noxious vapors that caused it. But when this all started, all I knew about was the 1812 event. If you're familiar with Mudflood, you probably heard of this, and I was the one that got that spread around. There was Tecumseh's Comet, there was the New Madrid quakes, the largest quakes in American history. Then a volcanic eruption caused the year without summer. So I made a video explaining this horribly, and I sent it to the other two main creators that were on this subject at the time. Well, they mentioned it in a video, but they pretty well seemed content to just look at old black and white photographs and speculate. So I said, screw it, I'll make videos. And sure, I sucked at it, had no idea what I was doing, but thank you guys for sticking around till I learned how to make a decent video. And the first thing I set out to do was say, okay, is there a gap in our timeline going back to where there could have been a major cataclysm and be able to make it all but disappear from history? And like I said, it took years to figure all this out, but I determined, yeah, it happened in the 1300s, and the Catholic Church is who made it disappear. That was a period of papal supremacy where in the lands that they controlled, they had authoritarian control, and there are literally accounts of people that were burned at the stake for having the wrong books. They also had the Inquisition. And then the Jesuits took over education in pretty much every country and over the course of the next few hundred years. So there's what happened, who covered it up, and I think one of the motives on that is if you are claiming to be the regents of God on earth and you're dictating what God says people should be doing, well, fiery darts in the sky, earthquakes, drought, famine, and pestilence that carries away 50 to 70% of the population, that could definitely make one think that God is angry at us and you're not leading the flock right. So this doesn't bode well for the church's authority and divine instruction. So I've got my who, what, when, where, why, and how. It took me years of diligent actual research, not casually watching some videos, digging through old archives and driving myself insane. But now let me tell you what happened with Mudflood and Tartaria. And I'm sure I'm going to lose some new subs here, just like I did when I started. But I and thousands of people in my audience watched all this go down. The idea of Mudflood came from Sylvie at New Earth Channel. She was showing ruins that were just buried in muck and spread all over the place and said, no, this isn't cultural layers. But it was two other people that really got out to a lot of people with this. I'll just say the American and the Brit. And the American was looking at these old photographs saying, where are all the people? And then a fairly small Russian channel made a video saying, hey, all of Russia used to be called Tartaria, Grand Tartaria. And then he showed some pictures like this of a street being demolished and there being stuff underneath and said everything was mud flooded. So then the American makes a video about Tartaria and it blows up, hundreds of thousands of views. And then just about overnight, there was a worldwide mud flood. All these buildings were dug out, completely unscathed from a major cataclysm. And every stone structure in the world was built by the previous Tartarian civilization. And then they rewrote a completely fake history that we have, and anybody that didn't go along with it was locked up in the insane asylums. You see the domes and pinnacles, that's Tartarian architecture and free atmospheric energy. Now, I'm serious. This was like over the course of 3 videos, completely a whole different reality they came up with the only proof being that that's how they said it happened. And then, hundreds of people are all making videos on this now, and it just keeps building and building. And whoa, slow down. Let's go back to phase one here. Now, I can't blame anybody for getting into the subject after a year or so. You see that many people doing videos on it, there has to be something to it, right? But it was amazing to watch how this started, because with no evidence, they just started saying this is the Grand Kingdom of Tartaria, and they went all around the world and built everything, and then disappeared and took all their tools with them, and then erased all knowledge of their memory. But hold on here. First off, grand just means large. This is Siberia, twice the size of the United States, with nobody out there, basically. And Tartaria is land of Tartars, or something to that effect, like Romania, Siberia, Macedonia. This is just a Latinized reference to the Tartars. They got that name from the Greek Tartarus, hell. Encounters that the Western world had with these people was when they came in to raid and plunder. They were so feared that I heard a Muslim say that if a Tartar had a Mohammed man as a slave and told him to go out in the street and fall on his sword, he would do it. People were quite terrified of the Tartars. And still to this day, if you ask me where you can find people that have been living the same way for thousands of years, I'd say Siberia, Tartaria. This is as far away from civilization as you get. And then somebody found the flag of Tartary and said, see, it really was a real country. We'll get to that in a second. But what does this tell you? Well, it tells me they were definitely Asian. They're practically the same flag as China. And we can look at photographs of who was living there 100 years ago. So apparently it was these people that spread all across the world, built all the cathedrals, every stone structure you can come up with, and then disappeared about 100, 200 years ago. Not quite sure about that. And I'm serious, that whole idea came from nothing but a name on a map. So I'm going to have to defer to Brandolini's law, which is the amount of energy and time needed to produce bullshit is orders of magnitude larger than the amount of energy and time needed to refute the bullshit. You guys believe whatever you want, but with no evidence other than some old black and white photographs, it's now been proven that all history is fake because a couple guys on the internet said so. And since it got hundreds of thousands of views, then a bunch of other people started saying so too. I'll just give you some examples. Like Brandolini says, there's just too much piled on top of a bad foundation here. So people that have never built a ham sandwich are looking at pictures like this and saying it's a lost, ancient, buried city. Well, this was them digging out and building the Paris subway in the 70s. And you can't just dig straight down next to a building. The building will fall off in the hole. You have to shore it up. This is done all the time. You drill some holes down, you pour it full of concrete, then another and another, and then you can dig out in front of it without the building falling in on you or the ground. That's literally all this is. And the holes are all uneven that they would call windows. That's just where they had a beam poking through. No Grand Tartarian would build that sloppily. And you tell them about this, and they say, no, it's fake. And then every building with a basement window became a Mudflood building. We don't just plop buildings down on the grass. Every single building has a foundation. The bigger one, the deeper the foundation. Real estate is at a premium in cities, so you're going to use up every square foot you can. So of course you're putting a basement in. A lot of buildings have parking garages down below. That's 80 feet deep right there. And it's actually quite common, even on residential houses, to put basement windows in, especially before electricity to let light in. The big commercial buildings had huge boilers in the basement. And then all of the rooms up above had these radiator heaters. I had these in my grade school still, which answers another question. Everybody says, well, they didn't have fireplaces, so how did they not freeze? They had radiators for a certain time period. There was the steam age. And that's another thing that Tartaria ignores. If civilization crashed right now, do you think people would build back with steam power, or would they go back to electricity? I mean, I can go scrounge up some copper wire and a magnet and make electricity. It's not very likely, but after the Tartarians, who were much more advanced than us, then the world went into the steam age for the Industrial Revolution. I mean, are we going to act like people all hallucinated steam trains going across the country? And of course, that's another thing. We didn't actually build the railroads. We dug them out. I promise you there's all kinds of digging going on when building a railroad, because you have to go straight through hillsides and grade things out. What, did we inherit the steam trains too? I'm just going to have to defer to Brandolini's Law once again. And I'm sure the people that have never heard of this are sitting there going, what the heck is going on here? Well, I'll tell you, we're ignoring all the archaeological evidence around the world that shows who lived here before us. There's even Spanish galleons full of gold at the bottom of the ocean. So yeah, that kind of stuff was going on 15 to 1800s. And then the older Greek era ships are out there carrying copper and tin ingots to make bronze with. They shipped all their goods in clay pottery. And there's even a scene from the Odyssey in a mosaic floor in England that was dug up a few years back. So I know they knew of the Odyssey back at this time. But there's archaeological evidence all around the world of the people that lived here before us. But now, after 6 years and hundreds of thousands of people looking into this subject, nobody's found a single Tartarian shipwreck or a Tartarian skill salt, coffee maker, anything from that era. There's no timeline of when this happened or how it was covered up. And then there's a lot of major contradictions. They say that there's no way people could have dug the big footings for cathedrals and whatnot by hand, but then they also say that every city in the world was dug out of the mud by hand. And that this big, huge mud flow didn't harm the buildings, didn't stain them, didn't leave anything behind. They just dug it out. This is Kansas City, and they always use particular angles of this. But if you look the other way, you see that people have built up on the bluff and built down below and are cutting in streets, because this is what Kansas City looked like when people started settling there. Now, there has been major mud flood here. Those are all big flood deposits there. It's right on the Missouri River. That stretches west into the Rockies, and every spring you've got the snow melt and it floods and leaves behind these big, huge flood deposits. So at first, they could only build up on the bluffs. Then they built a series of dams down the river to regulate water flow. And if it wasn't for those dams, you couldn't build along the river like they have now. But I was the only person for a couple of years that looked into things like this, while everybody else just acted like if somebody said it, then it's true. And most of these people had a Hollywood idea of history. They thought everybody was supposed to be living in log cabins 100 years ago. Holy crap, man. People were living like this in the 14th century. So yeah, there's some homesteaders out there living in log cabins, but the upper crust of society has been living like this for thousands of years. And then the American comes out and says, they couldn't have built the World's Fair at that time. They were too primitive. So this is actually ancient Tartarian architecture, and we just found it this way. And he just says there's no photos, no proof, and so it's a fact, and everybody took it as a fact. Well, if you never look for it, then you're not going to find it, but I had no problem finding it. But all the construction photos, yeah, those are Photoshop, because they actually had Photoshop before photographs. So this is an authentic photograph of a lost civilization's stone building they left behind. There's no questioning that. And then this is Photoshop of it being built. Yet somehow these solid stone structures caught on fire and burnt to a crisp. Well, it was actually a big tragedy. Quite a few people were in there too. It's really not that hard to understand. These were wood and steel frame structures that were stuccoed. This is stucco if you don't understand what it is. You nail a chicken wire over the plywood and then you smear it out with plaster. That's all the exterior of these buildings are. They just did it in a neoclassical look. Yeah, there's domes and cupolas on top of the buildings. And the structure that's supporting all of that is just wood and steel. You can even see on the inside, after everything's done, the steel trusses. I mean, this is just really so obviously not a solid stone structure like a cathedral or something. And what did the Tartarians use this big, huge open space for anyway? Maybe a nightclub or a Disneyland, because they've got 30 sets of train tracks going into this place. It's almost like they built it for a World's Fair where millions of people from all around the world came to see it. And it's funny because they always insist that this was all done with horse and buggy. There was only horse and buggy at that time. No, they built train tracks. I'll show some more on this in a minute, but you see the train tracks right here. So they just pull right up by the building and unload. What was the point of having a World's Fair in the first place? The same reason people do everything, to make money. Once again, you see the big, huge steel trusses inside here. But this was people showing off the latest, greatest technologies and getting hooked up with investors. This wasn't like today. People would go to school, get an education, and then go home and work in their own lab and innovate products. And a World's Fair is somewhere you can showcase it to millions of people over the course of a summer. But now all the engineers go off to Megacorp, and the patent for anything cool they come up with gets buried in the bottom of the basement. One of the innovative new products was the incubator. So if you've never heard of this before, comment what you think so far down below. We've kind of entered a brave new world here, no? Well, it gets better. See, they had these incubators at the World's Fair, and then you had the Orphan trains, which I'll explain in a minute. And it was really amazing because no one would even attempt to look anything up here. It was just Orphan trains, incubators. Everybody came from the incubators at the World's Fair. And then they were shipped out to all of these cities that had been dug out of the mud by I don't know who, but they forgot about it. And it didn't damage or stain the buildings at all. But then the incubator babies repopulated all the cities. And while people that have never heard of this before are sitting there going, what are you smoking? There's other people that have already got mad and unsubbed because this has become their religious truth. And I hate to break it to you, but Brandolini's Law. I've actually explained in the last two videos exactly why there were orphan trains at this time. Between 1820 and 1920, they imported 30 million people from overseas. The cities were full of slums and sweatshops where people couldn't afford to take care of themselves, and they had a bunch of kids that they couldn't take care of. So they put them on trains and shipped them out to Midwest farms where they could at least get off of the street. But the Tartarians would say, nope, that's just how they covered everything up. Instead of millions of poor noobs drinking and screwing and having all these kids, they all came from 8 incubators at a World's Fair. And the funniest thing about this is that's literally the plot to A Brave New World. You have the controllers that run the world behind the scenes, and they genetically engineer the world. This has already gone way longer than I intended to, but this just keeps going on and on. The cathedrals, no, we couldn't have built those. Static, do you seriously think that the Mormons built their chapel and Salt Lake City mega magnificent structures? Well, that was actually like the 3rd or 4th temple they built as they got chased all the way across the country. They started up in New York area, then down to Missouri. And by the way, horses have no problems pulling stone blocks, but they built a railway right up to it. And this isn't megalithic building. They're cutting 300 to 500 pound blocks here, which is no problem with a crane. That's just old school rope and pulley mechanical advantage. And then people act like stone cutting is some impossible feat. Those are made out of limestone. This was a couple of old guys working out in a limestone quarry. And in a few hours, one afternoon, they cut this big, huge block right here. It's just a couple of old dudes and a handsaw. The Mormons had thousands of men out there. But it makes more sense that that's all a lie. These photos are all photoshopped. And what really happened is the Mormons went out there and found this temple. And they can all keep a secret better than Bigfoot. But no, according to Tartaria, all they did was take off the free energy generators that were up on the top. So anyone that thinks this is actually real probably isn't watching anymore. And if they are, there's nothing I'm ever going to say that's going to change their mind. They've already built so much up on this. And then the people that haven't ever heard of this are sitting there going, this is insane. Say so down in the comments. Then one more thing is they'll show a bustling city like this. So there's people, but then they'll show a photograph like this and say there were no people. So for one thing, you had to leave the shutter open for 5 or 10 minutes at this time to take a photograph. So you see the kind of ghostly images where people were kind of wandering around, and then the one guy stood there on the wire for a while, so you can see him pretty good. Here you can see that the one guy stood there a little longer than the other guy, and that's just how long exposure works. Like this, the guy went out there with a flashlight and he's moving around, never got enough light on him to be picked up, but he was able to shine a bright light and draw these figures. But no, this is all just the official narrative's excuse for this. Nice try, cop. I know who sent you. This was a guy using a Daguerreotype camera from that time period in Chinatown in 2014. And you don't see any of the people walking up and down the sidewalk. Here you can see where the car stopped at the light and the blur where it slowly crept forward up to there, but you don't see the cars driving the other way across the street, and you don't see people on the sidewalk here. The other thing is, you get up at dawn when the light is actually good for photography, and you can get all kinds of pictures of this. Is San Francisco, one of the most densely packed cities in the world, and there's nobody out there. Golden Gate Park right by the museum. You don't think that it isn't a gigantic leap to say that all the people have disappeared off of Earth here? But the people that are into this insist it's the truth and get really aggro if you say that it's not. And they really can't stand to hear that there's anything wrong with this theory, so they're probably gone already. So I'll tell you how this started, really, if you're still listening at this point. This was 2019 at the height of the culture war. This is when they were tearing down all the Confederate statues and everything. And a bunch of woke trolls wanted to hear nothing but all history is fake. And somebody sicked the bots on this subject. This was before YouTube had good tech to fight off the bots. If you guys remember at the time, there would just be nonsensical sentences wrote out. But I could tell at the time that people were trolling this subject. And one of the best tools in the comrades toolbox is to erase someone's past and their identity. But there would just be ridiculous stuff in the comments sections, and then other creators would play off of that and incorporate it into the next video. They were getting 500,000 plus views, which is big bucks. That's more views than I got in 6 months. And that's the real reason Tartaria became a thing. It just came from this map. Every country has changed its name within the last 500 years, so this is nothing different. But if that's what you want to believe, because a couple guys on the internet said all history is fake and didn't present anything whatsoever to back it up, and everybody just played along, then have fun with that. And for you guys that have never heard of this, yeah, here I might as well finish this out with a video I made with my good friend Clickbait Jones back in the day about this subject. Enjoy, and I'll see you on the next one. Static out.
Oh yeah. What's up, YouTube? How you doing tonight? Tonight I thought we might look at some old black and white photographs while I talk to you real slow. You feel me? So baby, why don't you just relax? Let the sound of my voice carry you to Tartaria. That feels good, don't it? See, baby, if you're willing to ignore the whole Industrial Revolution and not do a bit of research on your own, then if I got a story for you, I'm bringing that juice. Now look here, we're going to ignore the progression of technology over the last 500 years and these cheesy circus sideshow setups. And we're going to talk about an ancient race of people that, well, nobody knows where they are. They done up and left and forgot to take their buildings. Never seen nothing like it. Now, believe it or not, baby, we just inherited all this stuff. Ain't nobody make this. Not in our time. Now, them's ancient Tartarian stone buildings, through and through. So, baby, I hope you're good and comfortable tonight, because we've been looking at these photographs for over 2 years. God willing, we'll still be looking at these photographs in 2 years from now. Give me some of that ad revenue. Shit, if I can just tell everybody these are old stone buildings that were inherited and nobody's gonna look, yeah, I keep doing this for life, baby. You're loose with the truth. Don't talk about facts.
So y'all are really gonna make me do this, huh? Everybody's just gonna keep making video after video, acting like these are old stone structures that nobody noticed when they went to the World's Fair, that these were ancient buildings.
Well, kids, I think what Mr. Static is trying to say is if you ignore all of the evidence that goes against your theory and keep making the same video, then you're basically misleading people. And odds are, if you've made a couple years worth of videos on this subject, you probably stumbled across some of these photographs and videos. And if you didn't, then you're probably not trying very hard, are you? See, I don't think anybody'd have a problem if you stuck somewhere close to the truth. But this ain't true. No, it's not. So now you got everybody staring at these black and white photographs, ignoring the real history of the world. What's wrong with you, man? Instead of exploring geology, anthropology, mythology, all the ologies, y'all gonna stare at black and white photographs and keep repeating that the historical narrative is fake. Historical narrative is fake. The historical narrative is fake. Don't never pick up no book. That's all lies. Just look at these photographs. We're smarter than everybody else. The historical narrative is fake. The historical narrative is fake. Hey man. Hey, anybody ever notice that these ancient Tartarians they write in English, like modern English too, like not even who forever and everything like that, like old English. Yeah, like I'm pretty sure that that type of English has only been around for maybe 150, 200 years. But anyway, I think my man Static said he'd do a video and show you guys how these were built step by step and introduce you to the idea of art installations. Because if anybody had bothered to look, you can still find this statue right here in Chicago. Who'd have thought? Now, I know it might seem weird to some people that they build these big buildings and then tear them all down, but you gotta think about the megalomaniacs of the time. Today, we got Elon Musk and all of them trying to get to space. And back then, you had Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and all kinds of other rich people that just wanted to show the rest of the world that they are just as rich, stuck up as they are. So baby, instead of getting mad and blowing up Static's comments section, why don't you go over to the people who are making these videos and misleading everybody and let them know what you think. This has been your host, Clickbait Jones. Much love.